everybody. My name's Kathy. I'm a bookseller here at Oblong Books. Oh, we have more coming in. Welcome. I just want to welcome everybody and thank you for coming. And I would like to introduce our guest for the evening, Nancy Matsumoto, George Weld. We'll be talking about this book right here, Reaping What She Sows. And afterwards, if anyone's interested, you can purchase books here. Also, a book by Nancy as well. And Nancy is kind enough to sign it for you. So, take it away.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming. I'm George Weld, as I mentioned. I am really just a Nancy Matsumoto fan from way back. I had a restaurant for a long time in the city called Egg that was really engaged from an early moment in the sort of good food movement and trying to bring local food, organic food to just sort of an everyday menu. And I think we kind of like have a lot of sympathetic ideas because of that. But this book is such an amazing collection of stories of, I mean, Nancy will do a better job of explaining it than I will, but amazing collection of stories of different producers she's met around the world, around the country, but also around the world, who are working together to create an alternative food system that that will help provide some ballast as we're kind of navigating through the, I'm going to just extend this metaphor, rough seas of our current culture and administration and all that stuff. Yeah, so I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting about the book in particular, from my point of view, I don't know if any of you read Omnivore's Dilemma, which has a similarly like kind of broad look at the food world. This book has a similar, like also like touches on all these different points where food is produced and distributed and meets people and sort of explains what's at stake for them and what they're working on and what's at stake for us as consumers and eaters and regular people in the issues that surround food. I don't know if you want to say anything more.
Yeah, thank you for that lovely introduction, George. Thank you all for coming today. I'm excited. I'm speaking to my first dog in the audience. And
her name is Olive, so it's sort of...
Oh, it's a food item? Yeah, she's adorable. And so, yeah, thank you all for coming. I am a huge George Weld fan because we have one longtime customer here in the audience. If any of you... Two, okay. I had the good fortune to go to Egg in Williamsburg. To me, it was an iconic place when I lived in New York, and I wish I had been able to get there more often because it had values. It was sourcing from small farmers, incredible food, incredible service, beautiful room. So I was excited when George agreed to be a conversation partner because I really feel like this can be more of a back and forth conversation because part of my book, A, is telling the women at the forefront of food systems change who are really trying to rebuild our very broken food system. And B, the hidden agenda is to write a very nerdy book about two dueling supply chains. One, short, transparent, and direct, the kind that George was on the chef restaurant end of. And then on the opposite end, this huge commodity, big ag, big food system, which is super long, global, very not transparent, very opaque, very extractive of resources and of humans and animals, and very exploitative. And so I really wanted to show the stark differences between those two systems in every chapter. And so I said, hey, George, you're part of this small supply chain, and a lot of the challenge of building this short direct supply chain is every link in it has to be there, and you have to have efficiencies the way a large one, because otherwise you're not going to be profitable. And it's incredibly hard and an incredible struggle, and I try to show that. So yeah, so I'm just hoping we can have, share our perspectives. I'm the reporter. I've not lived the farmer. I've not done any of this, and George has. So I think it'll be a fun discussion.
That's great. I mean, maybe if you just spend a little bit of a minute just sort of sketching out the like alternative supply chain and what you mean by that. 'Cause
Yeah. So it became, I've been writing about these things for a long time now, and so many little profiles about farmers, individuals who are amazing, restaurants, chefs. I profiled all of these people, and I saw how people are like, cool, we're into farm to table, we like organic and regenerative, but actually getting people to understand it in a systemic way, because it's a big ask to say, you're going to pay more, you're going to go out of your way to find these people, you're going to frequent farmers markets, which can be a little chore if you're not into it like I am. It's a big ask, and so people might go to that occasional farm to table restaurant or maybe try to buy organic here and there, but aren't really committed to a whole system-wide change. And my book is about system-wide change, because if we really want to combat big food and big ag, everyone has to be on board. So in my reporting, I would always see the same kind of problems crop up, like the small farmer who couldn't buy a combine because all the farming has gone industrial, and all those little farms that dotted the country, especially, this part of the Northeast. They were all very small, diversified, mixed farms, and they were regenerating land, they were part of the ecosystem. And when you get this consolidation of farms and you get agribusiness coming in and buying up, and it becomes harder and harder for those small and mid-sized farms to compete. So you would get these people who are like, oh, I'm going to go back to small farming, but they can't find the equipment. I profiled one farmer not far from here who had to go to Ohio to pick up a little combine. People that I profiled in the Midwest, they went, used equipment to find that little thresher, or in one case there was like a jury-rigged machine that they'd put together. So that was one. Sometimes there's a distribution gap. You could be a fantastic small organic farmer, but if you're missing that distribution link that can take your stuff to the city or to a green market audience, how can you grow your capacity? You're not going to be getting the kind of money you need. You're a niche small rancher, and there's no place to get your meat processed because everything is supersized, globalized, and there's no small processor in your vicinity. So the idea was to pull back the lens and to show the average reader it's not just about this nice farm and the farmer you see, it's about a whole supply chain. And unless every piece of that supply chain is in place, it's not going to work. These people aren't going to make it happen. So I have a whole chapter on grain, for example, where you're talking about not only getting farmers who haven't farmed small grains in decades because there's no money in it, all they're doing it, the only reason they're growing things like barley and rye is to feed their animals or for cover crops to just mow under. So first you have to say, hey, will you grow these again? And sometimes people are very reluctant because people have promised them stuff before. Are they going to make money off it? Then you have to get the mills. And in the case of like Maine Grains, Amber Lamke, who founded it, she said there were like people that you can count on one hand who actually had experience with small milling. And she had to go to Austria to get her first 3 millstones. She had to build her own. She had to go study with millers there. And then the bakers, I talk about June Russell from Grow NYC, who was trying to build out this regionalizing the local supply chain, and she's trying to get millers to mill and bakers to bake. And one of the bakers went to the miller and said, I'm sorry, your flour does not work, because they were not used to flour that's whole grain, that changes from season to season. A commodity crop, by definition, has to be uniform. So everyone's used to white flour that's always exactly the same, always going to come out the same, and the recipes are all calibrated to that. And so there was this huge learning curve. If you were a baker, you had to learn how to bake with flour that they didn't know the difference between, summer and winter, and the gluten content, and there's so many things that you have to master. And of course, we are the beneficiaries of these great breads. I don't know, where did you source your bread from?
We got a lot of our bread from Amy's at the
Yeah.
time. I mean, when we started, the grain shed was not.
It wasn't a thing.
It was not
yet.
just. Yeah, I mean, June hadn't even started her project when we started, so
Yeah.
we were just like trying to find organic wheat. A lot of which came from Canada.
Right, right. So yeah, perfect example, like you're trying to do your restaurant and that those pieces of the chain aren't even there yet. So George is very early in doing it. So anyway, that's the sort of the small, regional, equitable, you're trying to pay people more, you're trying to add value at every point and but keep this chain of custody very short so you can keep the money in the community as opposed to all of these hollowed out towns like Skowhegan is a perfect example where Maine Grains was founded. It was, a faded industrial town where all the industry, which included milling, had left because it was all supersized. The milling and wheat growing was all in the Midwest. And so you're rebuilding the supply chain, you're revitalizing local economies. It was very important for all of my growers to grow organically or regeneratively, so you're reversing 80 years of industrial farming, which is heavy chemical and pesticide use that has depleted soils. So you're doing so much that you're not getting paid for, really, And so Corey Carmen said to me, it's a steep ask. I'm asking people to pay for my work on the land. I'm regenerating rangeland. I'm asking people to pay for my inefficiencies because I'm a small grower. I don't have tens of thousands of animals. And, I'm asking them to support this because it's kind of the right thing to do. And so I just wanted to show how they're very different supply chains, and in each chapter I also try to take the reader through the way the commodity analog of this little food system works and show how different they are and how when you think about the fact that big agriculture and big food in just the past 5 years alone has spent $500 million lobbying Congress. It's hard to get the laws made that are going to help small organic and regenerative and sustainable farmers. So kind of in every metric, you're outcompeted. And I wanted to show that as a way to really convince people, you have a choice of what you can support. And I know it's hard. There are so many barriers and people always ask me about those. But it's possible, and you do what you can.
I mean, it's funny, it's not funny, but it's interesting to think about, like you said, it's a bit, it's a big ask, but I mean, and you're outcompeted on every front except for the front of flavor,
Yes.
the front of, as a chef, as a restaurateur, one of the things that was cool about engaging with this sort of food source was the challenge of it. It's much more interesting to try to solve these problems where you're you're getting a pig this week that's just so different from the pig you got. We got and having to figure out what to do with it. It's an interesting challenge. I always think about this line from the disgraced chef Mario Batali, who said, said in one cookbook, if you, I don't know if it was a cookbook or a book about cooking, and he said, if your customer comes on a Monday and then comes again on the following Monday and the food he orders isn't exactly the same, you're an asshole.
Yeah.
As a chef, and it's it's such a terrible way to live. Nobody wants to eat that way. It has the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
So there's that. I think we, people who are in this network, and I want to emphasize, the stories that Nancy tells in this book are full of joy and fun. I mean, it's not all dire and
Yes.
grim. I mean, it's people who are meeting these challenges with a lot of enthusiasm and
Yes.
pleasure,
Absolutely.
hard as they may be. But I also think it's worth sort of laying out the stakes of it, because we, from a certain point of view, the book that kind of changed my way of thinking about food was Diet for a Small Planet, Frances Moore Lappé, and I think I read that in the 90s.
Yeah.
And, then you keep reading books where they're we need to change the whole food system, and you're how come have we not done it yet? Or what's holding us back? And I think one of the things that I think it's worth being really clear about is the stakes of not doing it and I think you talk a lot about this book being born out of, or being clarified by the experience of COVID. And we can have a similar talk about the experience of living through this moment historically, and the effect it's having on the food
I think the
supply
stakes
chain.
are absolutely higher than ever. And I talk about how I saw maybe a little opportunity in the COVID pandemic, because it was that moment where global supply chains broke down, and it really affected the everyday consumer, because you went to the grocery store and you couldn't get things that you wanted to get. And you saw those images of those giant cargo ships, stuck offshore. And, even just the word supply chain, it wasn't an everyday vocabulary until COVID. And so now I can say supply chain and people get it. They can imagine what a big one looks like, and I'm saying now imagine what a small, resilient, local one looks like. So that was the opportunity, but the stakes, you're absolutely right, are much higher because of climate change. To me, it just, people have their head in the sand and are not dealing with it, because you have huge oil and gas lobbies, and you have politicians like the person who's in office now who really wants to just keep making money off it as long as possible and turning back the clock. You have 40 billion that Biden had earmarked under the Affordable or Inflation Reduction Act, for climate smart agriculture, for infrastructure, for soil regeneration. Almost all of that has been rolled back. You have $10 million in the Farm to School program that Patrick Leahy got started, which was a win-win for everyone. Farmers could get institutional procurement, which is huge when you start going to schools, because that's a lot of volume, and that's really sort of moving the needle organically and regeneratively. That's all gone now. So if anything, it is really, I start the book with a chapter on African American cooperatives and mutual aid societies, and my own family's experience in World War II prison camps for people of Japanese extraction. And I give examples of cooperative enterprises and mutual aid societies. And when a people or a system is completely disenfranchised, we have to rely on each other. And people were able to really generate leverage numbers and powers. The Federation of Southern Cooperatives, which is kind of an umbrella co-op, so a lot of co-op of co-ops. And 10 years, they were founded in 1967. You could think of it as sort of the agricultural arm of the civil rights movement. So you had all these freedom riders come into Georgia, and I talk about this woman, Shirley Sherrod, who was just a 17-year-old kid. She wanted to escape the racist South because, people were getting killed all the time if you were black or lynched. And then she meets this, crusading young man who's on the student committee for student nonviolent coordinating committee, which is very famous for organizing for civil rights in the South. And they end up marrying, establishing the first land trust called New Communities. So there's this kind of intertwined the civil rights movement and this kind of saying, hey, we have to help each other as farmers. So 10 years after they formed, they were kind of presiding or helping people manage 1 million acres of farmland. So it's that kind of power that you can, when you pool resources, you pool funds, you share technical expertise, share equipment, all the stuff that other big farmers were getting from the government, they had to give to each other. So when we think about this current moment, when I feel like agriculture is like NPR and PBS and university scientific research, all of them have had the rug pulled from under them, and agriculture is no different. So everyone's scrambling. How are we gonna do scientific research? How are we gonna broadcast the news? How are we gonna even feed people equitably? So to me, it's all the more important for grassroots to really mobilize and to say, wow, it's an important moment. We really have to shift our thinking and our behavior. But George, I just wanted to ask, as I really, when I'm laying out the supply chain, like in the meat chapter, I talk about a wonderful 100% grass-fed and grass-finished beef rancher, and I'm showing her entire supply chain. And Cora was actually one of the inspirations for the book, because in 2019, I was doing a story, and she described this whole supply chain that she was trying to build. She was getting a group of producers. They were going to share processing facilities. They were going to share distribution network, and they were going to, aggregate. And they had, education sessions where all the growers would come together and learn from each other. And again, there was a lot of joy, that kind of thing. People love it, the peer-to-peer learning. But then I go to Portland, and I went to a restaurant called Higgins, and the chef Greg Higgins has been for decades now really championing local producers. He was an artist who turned into a chef, and he had spent time, like so many sources in my book, lived in Europe and seen how the system was this kind of small connections between farmers and chefs and restaurant, and he wanted to recreate it. So, he has a Wendell Berry quote on the menu, and so I was able to sort of trace that producer through all the pieces of the supply chain to the chef cooking it. So George, being on that end, I'm just wondering, and so much of the book is about how you try to fix chokeholds and gaps in the supply chain. So I'm just wondering, from your end, how you were sort of viewing that supply chain and how you were sort of maybe filling those gaps in the supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, and when I started the restaurant, we really, the idea of working this way was baked into the business plan, such as it was. The business plan was basically I would show up and cook. That was it. But the whole point of the restaurant was to try to support networks like this. So I was prepared for a lot of challenges in supply and challenges of of cost, and but it really, I guess it really just, meat was an interesting example of a system, of a kind of a supply chain that we saw change a lot over the course of our time working on things. Like when we started off, the only really widely distributed ethical meat was distributed by Nyman Ranch.
Oh, right. Bill Nyman.
Yeah, a legend in his time, and I think opened the doors for a lot of things. But still, a lot of that meat, I remember going with a friend who was trying to do organic hot dogs. He would have to drive out to JFK to the shipping terminals and take pallets off of airplanes by himself and put it in the back of his Volvo. It was really weird kind of supply chain problems. And it wasn't local by any stretch.
Yeah.
It came from a long distance, and then we had other issues. We bought meat for quite a while. We bought our chicken and some of our pork from a farmer who showed up at the green market every week in New York and was approved by the green market. And I started working with another meat guy, Josh Applestone, who is himself kind of a can of worms, but he had a butcher shop in Kingston. He had anyway, he's like, I don't want my meat anywhere around that guy's meat. And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, they're at the green market. That's a thoroughly vetted, an organization that vets things very, very carefully. Well, it turns out this farm, which was up in Greene County, had in fact been getting shipments of Tyson chicken, rebagging them in their thing, and selling them at the green market, undercutting everyone else doing that work, doing really hard work. And this guy just rolls in week after week after week, and it's yeah, we can give you $1 cheaper per pound than everyone else. And you're like, wow, it's so great.
That blows my mind. That's the most blatant form of
it was outrageous.
I've heard about.
And it was this thing that kind of a lot of people knew about, and just I don't know why nobody wanted to say it, but at the time the whole system was so fragile and so small that it maybe that nobody wanted to it was you want everyone to trust the green market, so you don't want to make a big stink about it, but of course that guy's also undermining trust in the green market, and he's undermining everyone's business. Anyway, they finally got drummed out of town, and things stabilized quite a bit after that. But when we would get, for us, the funny thing about being part of the meat supply chain was just how direct it was. I mean, we would get half pigs every week, and the guy would just carry them through the front door. They'd come off they would go from the farm. Sometimes he would there'd be blood trailing along the floor past customers, and thankfully we had customers who were committed enough to what we were doing that they didn't mind. Or they
And
didn't
you were the
notice.
butcher and the chef, right?
Yeah.
You were breaking down the animals.
Yeah. So we would get, and so right. So that there was another place where we were consolidating that part of the supply chain in house, which is was challenging but also fun. I think about other places where the supply chain was as we went on, organizations like Hudson Valley Fresh or Hudson Valley Harvest, various people would try to develop these kind of distribution companies,
Right.
and sometimes they did a great job and helped us a ton.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it was an interesting way for us to learn about the problems of distribution was we tried to start a farm ourselves. We did start a farm ourselves in the Catskills after about 2 years of running the restaurant, and we grew vegetables there, and they started coming in now how are we going to get back to the restaurant? I'm going to be just driving them back and forth every day.
It's a perfect example of what I'm writing about.
And we also
It's
grew
missing link.
buckwheat as a cover crop.
Oh,
And I was like, oh,
nice.
cool, we can make buckwheat. And it was like, oh no, you need a special mill
Right.
for buckwheat because it has this extra husk. It was
my God.
all these dumb things. We were really excited to grow our own food, and we did successfully do it for years and got a lot of that food on the menu. But more than anything, it taught me the lessons that this book sort of lays out, which is the supply chain is complicated. These things that you think you just didn't even that we didn't even think about until we were faced up against who's going to bring this down for
You're
us.
such a great early case study. I want to write a Substack article about the early days when there was no supply chain. And so what made you think when you got into this? Did you have a business plan? Did you have it knew where you were going to source from? Were there other people even doing it?
There were people doing versions of it, but I didn't know what I was doing, and that helped a lot.
Yeah.
I had no idea what I was getting into.
Right? Yeah.
And I thought, this will last a year or two, and then when it goes out of business, I'll go work for Mario Batali or something. I'll have gained some experience.
Right.
But I was driven by a kind of ethical commitment to this way of living, which for me came from something I just absorbed growing up. In rural places and where farmers were just part of the...
Where was this?
Primarily in Virginia and South Carolina. When I was really little, we lived in Illinois briefly.
Mm-hmm.
My family was in the church, and there's a lot of overlap between farmers and church people. And the church we lived in Illinois, the Reagan Secretary of Agriculture was in the congregation. We moved to Virginia, much smaller places. And then we finally moved to South Carolina, where we were surrounded by farmland and farmers, all of whom came to our church, and came to realize that all the things they were growing, you talk about this quite a bit in the book, the things they were growing right around us were not accessible to us, because even vegetables would get boxed up, gassed to ripen, and then shipped off somewhere else. And it just felt what? It just feels crazy. And my family had farmed generations earlier than that, and I had this sort of romantic fantasy about restoring that, and it's it doesn't actually feel like a romantic fantasy anymore, because I think people are really working to do it. It's not happening the same way that it used to happen, but the people who are doing this work are making magical things happen.
And there's there's one quote of they're trying to build a regenerative beverage chain, and they're trying to bring things like malting back to Wisconsin, for example, which used to have a history of that. And university, a lot of times there's academic researchers who are involved in sort of trying to fill these. So this one woman, there's an organization called O-Grain, which is a small grain network out of the University of Wisconsin. And she said, there's kind of a joy and a nerdy kind of joy in trying to put together each piece of that supply chain, and we'll figure it out eventually. But there are so many barriers to, for example, the pest pressure is much higher in Wisconsin than it would be out west, where it's grown on a commodity level. So same thing with orchards in New England, incredibly delicious apples and pears, but you have to educate people that this is not the Pacific Northwest. You are going to have to use some amount of chemical intervention, but you're doing it in the least invasive. You're not doing it when there's buds, you're not doing it when there's fruit, but you're doing enough so that you can produce a delicious piece of fruit. And then, for just the person who's an organic purist, for example, they hear the word spray and it's like, sorry, I'm not buying that, unless you develop a whole certification process. And then you have to explain to people what the certification process means. So again, so much of getting people behind this is educating. And that's why the chef, is such a great front person, public. And so when you're doing it, people love your food. And again, going back to what George said about taste, that's one of the really strong cards of the alternative food system. It's taste. One of my baker sources said, it's flavor, it's taste that turns the key. Like, her customers don't really care that she's getting regenerative, locally milled, organic. They just love that it tastes incredible. And maybe some of them are curious. And I wrote about this baker in London who makes incredible things with incredibly sourced. They have a very advanced sort of regional grain network, but she won't advertise it. She's very, even more, I think British people maybe are even more like, if it's sort of healthy or good for you, it's like, I'm sorry, it's not going to be as delicious. So there are different ways that people are trying to do this, that are various levels of being out there and sort of proselytizing, or just saying, let the food do the talking, it's delicious, people are gonna like it, and maybe they'll ask questions. I was wondering I wrote about this cow share program in New York, and maybe you were part of that, where you could order like was that the way you ordered? I'm trying to remember who the supplier was, but it was a way to get people to do more whole animals and to move the regeneratively grown or ranched product. And it was, chefs were having to learn how to break down a half of a cow or whatever. But I don't know. You might have preceded that.
Maybe. I mean, when I was a kid, we used to get quarter cows, and we would go to the abattoir for that. Mm-hmm. But we did have to learn. I mean, we had to learn how to butcher. And one of the things that was so great about the restaurants in Brooklyn when we opened up was, it felt enough at the time, like there were enough people for everybody, and we were all trying to do something, not all, but like there's like a network of restaurants. So the guy who taught me how to butcher a pig, how to break it down into cuts, was a chef at another restaurant, like technically my competition. But he was like, yeah, come over. He had like an illegal walk-in refrigerator in the backyard of the restaurant where they just did butchery. Yeah. He taught me how to do it in like 20 minutes. It was like that kind of knowledge sharing, that kind of like generosity, the kind of assumption that we'll all be better off if we share this rather than try to keep it to ourselves, was really pervasive in that part of Brooklyn at the time among the restaurants that we were involved in. And then that kind of like people kind of pulled, or as it got more and more crowded and more money came in, and people got better about sort of marketing themselves as a farm-to-table restaurant without actually doing the work, there was less generosity and less sharing.
And so many of the, I'm sure that's true, so many of the organizations and the farms and the networks that I talk to have this very important peer learning component, sharing information in the network. And I think that's where a lot of the joy and the feeling of, like I have a community, I'm not alone. This is such hard work that the Organic Valley dairy farmers, for example, they're all family farms and they're all small. At the time I was reporting my chapter, it was a very difficult time for organic dairy. And people were really, I was worried for a lot of people's mental health, frankly. Yeah. And afterwards I heard that, because of the lobbying and the sort of work that was being done in the organic sector, the pay scale had kind of gone a little better. It was a little more, it was a little more viable as an occupation. But they all said it's that peer-to-peer learning, it's that making available knowledge. It's sort of open source kind of thing. In the seed chapter, I talk about the difference between Monsanto and Bayer, and the women in my book. And one of the big differences is, you have patent protection on seeds now, and you have to get seeds every season because that's the way they've genetically, or that's the way they've hybridized them. And what the women in my book are doing is they're trying to preserve either indigenous seed keepers, they're trying to bring back old seeds that have been co-opted and now have names like Boston marrow when it was really a Haudenosaunee squash, and also just sort of getting back to that ancestral seed saving and seed sharing. And it's a very open and democratic movement. So you're growing open pollinated seeds, so anyone who buys a packet can do their own saving and replanting year after year, and it should be free. It should be the way it was done for millennia. And so is that kind of openness and wanting to share and wanting to really emphasize culture and community food ways too. So like some of these women, I focused on diasporic women, so a Vietnamese immigrant, Pakistani, Palestinian woman, who often you're separated from your country by war or famine or disease or whatever, and you can't go back. And so when you get the second or third generation, they don't even know what those ancestral vegetables taste like. And they have to sort of figure it out using elders in the community who are going to taste test. And so I have stories like that that are really very joyful. They're about bringing the community together and remembering, oh, these are the foods, this is what a South Asian tomato, an Indian tomato would taste like. It's sour and a little bit bitter. So many of the stories relate to culture and just tradition. And I think when people are getting together at a restaurant like yours, there's just a lot of joy because the food is so good and you want to support this chef. I don't know if you had the issue, like I remember Dan Barber talking about, like when you're nose to tail, thing, you have two of everything. And he would say how, you only have two of everything. Did you have that kind of limitations that you had to figure out, okay, how am I going to serve that? And
well, yeah, I mean, it was funny for us because a lot of the, we were primarily a breakfast and lunch restaurant. And when we started doing half pigs, we were open for dinner, but our dinner was much slower. So we would have like 12 or 10 pork chops out of half a pig. Mm-hmm. And if our dinner had been like our breakfast, it would have been a disaster. Since nobody came to dinner, we could make that stretch for a week.
Yeah.
But it was an interesting problem, generally speaking, because what people want to eat versus what a cow actually provides per cow are way out of whack. So there are only so many ribeyes, but there's a ton of ground beef kind of meat, and so making like there's kind of like from a fashion point of view, maybe you don't want to have a hamburger on your menu, but from an ethical point of view, it's really important to have a hamburger on your menu. Mm-hmm.
And then what about like the heart and the kidney? You gotta, what are you doing with all of that if you're trying to use it all?
We made scrapple, which is like a and I mean we made other sort of charcuterie as well, but like we could put a lot of stuff in the scrapple, which we could only make so much of it, but it was like a really diehard group of fans who would eat it.
That again is educating people, right? Like we're using everything, and these are pieces that are available.
It was interesting, that we also had like mixed feelings about educating people because we just wanted people to eat and enjoy it, and then if they asked about it, find out like, oh, cool, I didn't realize you could do that. But then it also began to feel important. Like people need to understand. We'll put the farmers' names on here. It's just like it's such a tricky thing where you want to let people eat and enjoy their food, but also like encourage them. Like you're also doing great work by doing this. So I think it's a really important thing to think about with a book, and like the idea of mutual aid. And one really easy way for everybody to participate in those kinds of systems is to eat better, to make better choices about food and what you buy, and buy from people you know. And no choice will be perfect, but
I know I've been feeling bad because I've been doing a number of talks now, and many of my friends have come, and then they'll say, oh, I really need to try harder, or I'm going to get to the farmer's market, and I almost feel like I'm the food system police, and I'm saying, you can't be perfect. When I'm with my mother, she lives right next door to a Walmart, and that's the best option. I go to Walmart, So it's not like we're all perfect, but I kind of feel guilty, like being like some sort of horrible enforcer for good food. But yeah, there's a fine line, right? You don't want to preach to people, but you also want to sort of educate them if they're curious. And, yeah.
Could you tell us what scrapple is? Sorry.
Yeah. Scrapple is, we would describe it as like we never actually describe it this way, but as, I'm not going to describe it that way now either.
It's like, do you want to know how
The problem is that when you describe it, it sounds disgusting,
Oh, no,
but it is so delicious. But really, it's sort of like
like a-
describing a hot dog.
It's like a mid-Atlantic pate it's like organ meats and kind of bound together with cornmeal, and then so then it sets because there's all this gelatin in the meat, and then you can sort of cut it into slices and sear it, and so because it's really crispy on the outside, it sort of melts on the inside. It's really delicious.
If you go to Baltimore, you'll see it.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
popular in the Mid-Atlantic.
Mid-Atlantic.
I had a cousin from Delaware who
Yeah.
insisted that I put it on the menu. It kind of was a joke, and I was like, actually, it'd be helpful to have it
Yeah.
on the menu. So
Right.
We
You
did
can
it.
use up everything. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious when you talk about the challenge between like something being fashionable versus ethical. If you could just speak a little bit more about, from a restaurant point of view, of straddling that line.
well, it's when we started, there's a lot of like the sort of farm to table as a catchphrase was really like taking off, and it could feel a little bit like, yeah, how do we want to deal with this? Because people are going to stop wanting to eat this way if they hear it over and over and over again. So kind of playing it kind of, for one thing, we had a ethical position, like we're only going to buy food in this way, whether people care or not. We're only going to do it this way, and if we have to go out of business because we can't keep it going, too bad. Like, we'll go out of business. We're not going to have a restaurant that isn't living by these values. I've actually experienced it most intensely as a parent because, my children grew up in the restaurant and eating you have this fantasy as a parent that like if you just show your kids all the great things, how delicious all this real food is, they'll just naturally start eating that way. And my kids hated all of it. Even they would like hang out in the restaurant kitchen with me, and my daughter learned how to she learned the cuts of the pig from like standing over a pig. But yeah, she kind of got mad at me when she was a teenager, saying like, I can't believe you forced me to grow up in an ingredient-only kitchen where we had to make everything from scratch and there were never snacks around. And
Where's the ultra-processed food?
yeah, exactly. And we had the same problem with school. We tried to make big change in school food, and kids there would buck against it. And there would always be some who would tell you, yeah, it's great. But I think ultimately, and this is why I sort of started by mentioning the question of stakes, like, you just have to decide, no matter what, you just got to do better, like for yourself and for the world. And if it's unfashionable, it's unfashionable. Like, and yeah, if my kids eat Snickers instead of lunch, like, okay, like, but I'm still gonna keep buying the same kind of food, encourage them to buy that food. My older daughter has kind of come around, is actually at the University of Wisconsin now, and is surrounded by people who are doing really interesting work. But it was a really hard thing to kind of come to terms with, to have kids just be like, this is disgusting. I just want white bread. I want American cheese.
Yeah, I can imagine how hard that was.
Yeah, it's not at all what I had in mind.
Yeah. I guess your question about fashion and ethics, fashionable, is it not, like, you're not supposed to put a hamburger on the menu, or like it's uncool, or?
Yeah, it has its moments.
Because a lot of restaurants have a hamburger.
There was definitely a moment where like
Yeah.
Like, I'm not putting a hamburger on the menu. It's like
Yeah.
pandering to the.
Yeah, right. But what about things like getting to people to eat sweetbreads or organ meat? I mean, when I was at Le Vaudor, they had cervelle, which is brain. And my French friend was like, great, I'm ordering that. But how much can you sell some things to American? And how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, those are, I think there's like always sort of edge cases where it just, it doesn't, it's always going to be a challenge. But for me, like the sort of mainstream of it is, we know, and this book does a great job of laying it out, like we know how to do this right. It's very straightforward. At the restaurant we had a kind of hierarchy of sourcing where, our best case is it's local, it's organic, it's regenerative, and then all the way down to, I think our sort of the bottom was it's organic, but it's shipped in from somewhere else. And there's so much variety available in that spectrum.
Yeah.
And your worst case scenario is you're buying organic food from California.
That's amazing. I mean, there's such high standards, but how do you make it work out with pricing? Because you're paying more for these ingredients. And does breakfast make it easier because I don't know, you have a little
No, it
more
wasn't
limited?
easy.
It's not
The only
easy.
thing, I mean, it worked for us because we were really busy.
Yeah,
it
you
was
did
very
volume.
hard
Yeah.
for if you're not super busy. I mean, you can figure out ways to make it work. But I'm thinking about for regular consumers, where like, like your friends who are worried about going to Walmart or whatever. Like, there are like you have to compromise. You have to make choices all over the place. But there's so much information around that you can always make there's almost always like a slightly better option.
Right. Yeah, I think that's what we're trying to do, is just get people to be more conscious where you can source, to pick the better source. Sometimes you can't always do it. And yeah, it kind of becomes, you kind of want to do more and more. Like I'm in a food co-op and we care about where we're sourcing everything from, and we write articles about it and we try to educate each other. And so for me, it's just a way of life, and I do find a lot of happiness to be with other people who want to do the same thing. One thing I was going to ask you is like, okay, you've lived the life of true farm to table, but as you said, so many people say that. At last night's talk, one of the farmers was saying, yeah, there are places that have us on the menu and they haven't bought from us in 2 years, Like how can you tell who's real and who's not when you're looking at a menu?
I mean, unfortunately, you probably can't.
Hard to.
Yeah, I mean, surely there are things like if they have, a cheap ribeye and they're claiming to be buying from a local grass-fed beef source, it's probably not.
Yeah.
I mean, you also, maybe it's just I feel like you can just kind of get a feel from the way the menu is set up. Like, does it feel like it's bragging about what they're doing, or is the point like the food is good? But I mean, honestly, like if you ask me right now to name the restaurants in Rhinebeck that were doing great work in terms of sourcing, and the restaurants that were phoning it in, I couldn't tell you. It's not. I mean, we're in a really lucky place here. Like the Hudson Valley is full of great food, and farmers doing amazing work.
Yeah.
But I think maybe we're at a point now, especially in a place like this, where like depending on a restaurant to be your sort of gateway into this stuff is no longer as important as it was. There's so many other ways to access this stuff.
That's interesting.
than restaurants.
Yeah, I would say, buyer beware. So many people, I talk about greenwashing in the book a lot. The 100% grass-fed and grass-finished rancher is competing with these national chains that have these really slick website. And she said, I know for a fact they're straight up lying about their practices. And what can you do? There isn't enough enforcement. So again, the shorter that chain is, like if you're talking to the supplier at the farmer's market and you say, oh yeah, what are your practices? How do you do this? What's your, and a lot of people say I'm everything but the, official certification of organic. This is how I grow, and, it's a hassle, it's expensive. So you can develop sort of some trust with the relationship. And then, cook your own food. I always say, get whole foods at the farmer's market and cook it yourself, you're saving a huge amount of money. If you can grow it, you know. There's so many different ways, like the co-op I belong to, the same really good organic local whole grain flour that my baker friends are baking with, I can get at my co-op and make my own bread for a fraction of a, you know, expensive artisanal loaf. So yeah, whatever your inclination and your abilities are, there are ways to work in these better sourcing modes and not, you know, go bankrupt doing it. And so I think we're always weighing things and making choices, and, you know, maybe meat is really important to you, so you're gonna eat less, source better, know your sources. I love vegetables and grains, so I eat a lot of those things, and legumes, and I'm very happy. You know, other people need more meat, so it really varies. But I do think that so much of it is just an awareness that there are these two systems, and really it's kind of a no-brainer if you care about the planet and the welfare of people and animals and the environment. So it's hard work, and but I do try to show that it's fun too. You know, I'm sure you had a lot of fun with George was telling me you still get people coming up who remember you, right? Remember, they would
We
have someone right
miss
here.
that restaurant several times a week. And it's the kind of food that, like, I wake up at 4 a.m. and I'm like, I really
Yes.
want that, like,
I
that
know.
Carolina kale with the cornbread in it. Like, I have the memory of the flavor of
Yes.
it, even though I haven't had it in like 10 years. I remember the texture of it, like,
It's so
exactly. And I
good,
don't
right?
have that with a lot of foods. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's that kind of loyalty that it can engender. And, you know, whenever I'm at dinners that are, you know, producers who are doing this, there's just so much joy. And it's hard not to feel joyful when you're eating their food, and it's so incredible, so delicious.
It's just, I mean, I was saying to my wife earlier tonight, it's just like such a nice feeling when you go, I mean, for me, like, to go to work every day, like, the first time the current president was elected, my daughter had stayed up as late as she could because she was so excited that she was going to see the first woman president. It's like the most heartbreaking morning
Yeah.
I've ever had as a parent. Well, that's maybe not true, but it was super bad. But then to be able to say, like, going to work is going to help. Buying that food is going to help. Like all those little things, like, that feel so trivial and so, like, I think especially because it's been caught up in fashion, it can feel like,
Yeah.
ugh, again. And I think that's what my children's feeling about it is like, oh, I
Yeah.
have more organic than this. Like,
Yeah.
but it makes such a huge difference in the world that we want can exist if we make those choices, and if we don't, it won't. And it's just, to me right now, it feels just as simple as that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I remember my son was in college and at that election,
Oh,
he
yeah.
said there wasn't a class he went into that day where someone didn't burst out crying. You know, it was so wrenching to so many young people. But yeah, it does feel like you're doing something, you know, you're trying to make a difference.
And you
you're
really
trying to-
are. Like, you really legitimately are.
And I think more than ever, I mean, food has always been so important. It's, you know, responsible for a third of greenhouse gas emissions, and it's part of our everyday lives. But more than ever, I think because of climate change and because of the way there's been such a concentration of wealth that is embodied in this corporatization of agriculture, corporatization of fisheries, where, you know, rich companies, I mean, the fisheries, it's huge private equity companies who are investing in these corporations and just extracting, pushing out all smaller fishermen. So more than ever, I feel like it's all part of the same fight, you know, is that to save agriculture is about healing the planet, reversing climate change, but also just giving small producers a fighting chance to exist, where they're being more and more, and when you look at the, you know, now it's moved to the tech sector, it's basically the same story of consolidation and a few people enriching themselves at the expense of everyone else. So really, I feel like this grassroots movement, I mean, I was saying the other day, like part of the joy, the guy I was talking to last night, talk about the joy and the hardship. And I said, yeah, it is kind of two sides of the same coin because it's so hard when you're all together. I said, it's like being revolutionaries, and you're just like, okay, we're doing this even though it's really hard, but at least there's a lot of camaraderie and there's a lot of joy in trying to do this together. So I totally know what you mean about like just feeling good, like that you're trying to do something.
So years ago, my wife and I, we became connected with the Columbia Land Conservancy and their matching program. And we had a farmer live on our property, and we created a CSA, and we had dinners every week, and we had potlucks, and we had puppet shows and concerts in our barn, and we did that for 15 years. And then the farmer, he started having children, and and he realized he had to make a move, so he purchased property, and and he's doing great, and he created he created a small CSA, but he's still farming, so that's the good news. So, but our property is still a working farm, but we're leasing our land, and so we're not having as much fun with community and creating community around the CSA that we had before. So I'm wondering if it's still active, the matching program, and if they're still creating those kinds of relationships.
I don't know about this particular organization, do you?
No, I don't.
Yeah, but I was just at a farm called Pitney Meadows yesterday when I was in Saratoga Springs, and it's a really interesting example of a farm that was in private hands for generations. I mean, it started in the late 18th century, different owners, but the Pitney family still is on the land, but the town sort of raised money to preserve open space, and then they created a conservation easement. So the family is still there. Bill Pitney, I think, is still farming there, but they have sort of become a nonprofit, and it's all about being community-based. Half of what they grow goes to community-based organizations. They have to they're still figuring out how to make it work financially.
Right.
But they have workshops, they have kids classes, they created all these big container gardens, and it's a sliding fee scale. So if you can afford it, you pay full price, if whatever you can afford. So it's very diverse income levels. And then they had some containers labeled as Master Gardener. So you have that sort of learning, component where people are sharing knowledge. And if you're a beginning farmer, you could go to that Master Gardener for help.
Right.
And I write a lot about this kind of information sharing and sort of open source, and that's a real key. So I was excited to see this, and I think there are land trusts. There's American, what is it called, Farmland Trust,
Yeah.
which does great work, and it's all about how do we preserve the open spaces and how do we connect the farmers with the land and get the landowners involved. So easements and land trusts are really great instruments. So you could reach out to American Farmland Trust and say, how do I do this in a way that
Right.
makes sense for everyone?
Well, I mean, our farmer had internships for, that 15-year period, and so we became an incubator for other farmers who went out.
That's amazing.
Some of them just worked for other farms, some of them went into education, but some of them did, continued to become active farmers.
Yeah, it's very similar to like Pitney Meadows is trying to sort of emulate Glenwood in Cold Spring, and they are an incubator. They train up-and-coming farmers.
Yeah.
They have an amazing CSA program where they're trying to make up for the loss of SNAP benefits and getting as much food to the community. So I think Pitney Meadows, as it continues to grow, will be that kind of a place for a hub for the community.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of interesting, people were asking like, how do you get past that point where, it takes years to be profitable for some farms. And there are organizations that are looking at how do we finance these. And one of my sources talked about patient investors, where it's not sort of your typical, okay, when are you going to start making returns and make me rich? It's more like, we believe in you and we believe the work you're doing on the land. So there are many different creative financing ways that people are thinking of to try to make these really hard things work.
Yeah.
Takes a lot of ingenuity, and there are a lot of amazing people.
We didn't become profitable until COVID.
Oh,
Makes a
really?
big difference.
Yeah.
We were just limping along, 50
Yeah.
CSA members for years. And then COVID happened, and then we went up to 150,
Yeah.
175.
Did it last after COVID? Is
It lasted for about 5 or 6 more years after that. And then the farmer just, he had to leave.
Yeah.
And then the matching program wasn't as dynamic for some reason. I don't know what happened. There weren't enough farmers that were interested in putting in the work and not owning their own property.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's
which is
interesting.
understandable. Yeah.
But there are lots of. I'm just thinking about like the NOFA conference or
Yeah.
the Young Farmers at Stone Barns. I don't know if they still do that, but like there are always people like where can I farm? Where
I
can
know
farm
there's
it?
so many young people really desperate to farm. So yeah, Young Farmers Association, is that what it's called? There's
I think so.
yeah,
It used to be. I'm not sure.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, there are so many barriers, and land access is a huge one.
Yeah.
So that's a question that a lot of people are working on.
Okay, one more question, you think?
Oh, okay, and any more questions? One more? No? Okay.
Nothing else?
Well,
Well, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you all for